David. Turning from the production side of food systems to the consumption side, as Lulama mentioned, we've seen enormous changes in urbanization and income growth that has resulted in rapid change in diets. What do you see from your research as the implications of diet change in terms of opportunities for growth and employment on the one hand, and also for consumer nutrition and health on the other? What kinds of policies are going to be needed to improve or mitigate the outcomes that can be expected from this rapid change?
Okay, thank you, Duncan, and thank you, everybody. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about employment issues in my talk this afternoon, so I'm not going to focus here on that topic, but I do want to make one statement about employment that I think is very important, and that is that we all know that over the next, currently and in 10 and even 20 years, the majority of the population, considering Africa as a whole, will remain in agriculture. But when we look at new jobs, where are the new jobs going to be created, the situation is actually quite different. So there are three different pieces of research, both our own research by Maggie McMillan and Company, and research by Louise Fox and Dion Filmer at the World Bank, all using different data and different analyses that come to the same conclusion, which is that both over the recent past and in the near and medium-term future, it's expected that at least twice as many new jobs will be created off the farm as compared to on the farm. So 2/3 or more of new jobs will be coming off of the farm, 1/3 or less, and a declining share will be coming on the farm. So this does not mean that we don't invest in agriculture. It doesn't mean that we don't invest in interesting youth in agriculture and in a more dynamic agriculture. The arguments for that are very sound. But I think it is something that we perhaps need to integrate more fully into our thinking about employment going forward. So turning now to the nutrition issues, yes, the diet change, and we had an excellent question on that earlier today. So yes, we do see our research has been focused on East and Southern Africa. Let me say that. We haven't looked at data from the rest of the continent. So what I say is technically specific to that area. We do see a very rapid rise in demand for processed foods. This rise in demand for processed foods is very broad, urban and rural, and across the income spectrum. Surprisingly, we see it among very low-income people also moving heavily towards processed foods, and to some extent towards the animal products that kind of change that we're familiar with. So a very robust trend throughout the world, and a trend that we see emerging very strongly in Africa, is what's called the nutrition transition, where people move from having too few calories to having too many calories, too many of them from fat, too much salt, too much sugar, not enough micronutrients. And Africa is very much in the midst of this. It's seen primarily in urban areas now, but it's expanding, and as I said, it's a very robust worldwide trend. So you have what's called the dual burden of malnutrition. You have at the very same time many people who still have too few calories, and then you have a growing number of people who have the too many calories with actual poor nutrition within those too many calories, as I was referring to earlier. So this is a major issue in Africa. It's only going to get bigger. I would like to say a couple things. One is that not all processed foods are unhealthy. Okay, there are a lot of processed foods out there that are low in salt, low in fat, etc. Maize meal being one of them, and different types of maize meal. We also see, for example, the rise of in Tanzania of lishe products, lishe referring to meaning nutrition in Swahili, and a very broad rise in the production of milled grain products that have various grains, sometimes dried vegetables, sometimes dried fish in them. And although we don't have the data yet, this does not seem to be limited only to the elite that are demanding this. So we need to have a better handle on what the products are that are in the markets, and what the nutrition profile of those products are, and how that's evolving over time. So as I said, I do see, and this is a bit anecdotal at this point, but we're collecting data on it, an increase in demand for healthy foods. turning to actions that can be taken to deal with this issue. The first thing I would say, I don't want to be a pessimist, but I will say it's a very, very, very difficult problem to deal with because it's a very robust trend. There are a few exceptions. You know, South Korea has partially avoided the problem. Areas of Finland have avoided. There are a couple other places where maybe they've been able to avoid this. But with rising incomes and urbanization, it's a very, very, very robust trend. However, what might be done? First of all, increasing the availability and decreasing the price of fresh produce available to African consumers. This could be achieved to some extent through much better investment, public investment in partnership with private sector in rectifying just the deplorable conditions of wholesale markets and retail markets in so much of the urban areas of the continent. Public education, I think there is a latent demand fairly broadly distributed for more healthy foods, okay? Public education could take advantage of that and try to encourage that. And then I would also toss this out. Do we need to look at increasing the cost of unhealthy foods through taxation, through fiscal policies? You know, when you go to all the street vendors in Maputo or in Dar es Salaam or in other cities, and you look at what they're selling, and when you go to low-income markets, you see a lot of junk food, a lot of junk food. When you ask the sellers who's buying that, it's largely low-income women for children. Okay, I think this is a big issue. Again, I don't have an estimate on what the share of expenditure is on these things, but it's a big issue. So do we need to consider increasing, not just decreasing the cost of healthy foods, but increasing the cost of manifestly unhealthy foods, which are growing rapidly in availability? Thanks.
Thank you, David. And of course, the whole problem of low-income consumption of unhealthy foods is not an African problem. We face exactly the same problem in Michigan and many parts of the United States. So this is a global problem, not specifically an African problem. Yeah. And we will have much to learn from Africa in solutions to this.